Now we are going to start the session of free paper, Comprehensive Ophthalmology, in which we have got 10 speakers. And the first speaker is Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi. Is she there? No. Sukanya Padhi from Odisha. Then Swati Shri Nayak. Okay. So let's start with you only. Her topic is impact of flipped classroom implementation in ophthalmology undergraduate courses.
Medical education is undergoing a shift towards innovative learning approaches. Growth in information and technology demand active learning and skill development.
Swati, first you introduce yourself.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Swati Shri Nayak. I am working as an associate professor in the Department of Ophthalmology at AIIMS Guwahati. My topic for presentation today is implementation of flipped classroom in ophthalmology for undergraduate students. So medical education is undergoing a shift towards innovative learning approaches. The growth in information and technology demand active learning and skill development. Ophthalmology education faces challenges due to limited time in the curriculum. The flipped classroom model offers a solution by replacing lectures with self-paced videos. Research supports the effectiveness of flipped classrooms in various medical subjects, while limited research exists on flipped classrooms specifically for ophthalmology. Now, what is flipped classroom? It's a pedagogical approach that inverts the traditional teaching methods. The students engage with course material independently before the class, for example, videos, readings, and the class time can be dedicated to active learning activities like discussions, problem solvings, and projects. The various benefits for the students is it is self-paced, it has their increased engagement, enhanced problem solving and critical thinking skills, and for teachers, it gives them more time for individualized attention, opportunities to foster deeper learning, and enhance student-teacher relationships. So meta-analysis has consistently demonstrated the superiority over traditional lectures in terms of higher test scores and lower failure rates. Tang et al. And Lean et al. Have demonstrated the successful implementation, but in specific subjects like ocular trauma and glaucoma. Preparing recorded lectures, it requires significant time investment. So although it offers benefits, its effectiveness across entire curriculum remains unexplored. So the objective was to assess the impact of implementing a flipped classroom approach in ophthalmology courses for undergraduate students. 6th semester undergraduate medical students, 54 students were selected, and the intervention was a flipped classroom method that was compared with didactic lectures. And the outcome measures were pre and post-exam test scores, post-intervention skill exams, qualitative feedback on experience. The time duration was 120 days, and it was a quasi-experimental study design. So in the flipped classroom before the class, they were given prepared lectures, shared study materials, and supplemental content. They were given 2 days of self-studies time. The class started with a pre-class test, and then it was followed by the faculty introduction, question answer session, interactive group discussions, and summarizing of the class. The study material was reviewed, and it was post-class test and skill assessment and interviews were done. This is an example of the material shared. In didactic lectures, they just had the pre-class test, they listened, and then it was followed by this outcome basis. The quantitative data, it was by counts and percentages. Qualitative data, quantitative data by mean standard deviation, and pair t-test was used. 5-point Likert scale was used to grade the responses. So there were more males, like 37 males. When we compared the mean pre-test and post-test scores, the flipped classroom post-test scores were definitely more. Comparing the feedback form, we saw that there was definitely an increase in the flipped classroom, while the practical learning was almost the same in both the groups. Class attendance and Likert scale, that was the evaluation response rates, that was 100%. The flipped classroom, it exhibited significant improvement in self-rated learning ability. The exam scores were also statistically higher. The qualitative feedback, it supported the positive impact of flipped classroom, but there was no statistically significant difference between intervention and comparison group regarding practical skill demonstration. So this was a highly effective model. Students achieved superior performance. It received positive feedback. They valued the flexibility and active learning opportunities, and active learning strategies like group discussions and problem-based learning could be introduced. The use of technology, it enhances student engagement. They can learn at their own pace and revisit the material as needed. It can be adapted to different learning objectives, but further research can explore the long-term impact. Studies can also investigate the cost effectiveness. So it is essential to assess the technical requirements and infrastructure needed. Faculty development programs can be implemented to equip educators. Evaluating student satisfaction and feedback is crucial. It has the potential to revolutionize medical education. Some limitations are it requires significant technology and computer access. Student fatigue and the focus on new subjects can further reduce the survey response rates. Finally, to conclude, some of the key considerations for implementation are careful planning and organization, high quality instructional materials, effective classroom activities and assessments, technical support and training for the faculty and the students, ongoing evaluation and refinement. By addressing these challenges and leveraging the opportunities, the flipped classroom can be a valuable tool for enhancing ophthalmology education. These are my references. Thank you all.
Excellent.
Can you give some examples, some model classroom, flipped classroom education system? Some models somewhere running in medical college successfully running. Is there an example of that?
Sir, at such
Or
there have been
you are experimenting it.
yes, sir. At such there have been no reported studies on that. I mean,
No,
even
know
if
that's
they're
a new
running.
concept. Basically Western concept.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But how do you compare it with the traditional teaching for undergraduates basically? If they don't have the basic knowledge, how they are going to learn?
Sir,
from
actually,
the,
sir, they will be
video
share.
and literature.
Sir, actually, the thing is that if you give them just that didactic lectures, then they just come to the class without learning anything. They just expect that in that 1 hour duration, the teacher is expected to teach them everything. Suppose a new topic like glaucoma, the teacher is expected to teach them everything. And if you see, the time allotted is very limited. Like you get only 6 hours of teaching for glaucoma. But then with that sufficient time, we also need some participation from the students. So if you share the material beforehand, they get time to at least study at their own pace. So once they have some background knowledge and then they come to the class, at least they have, they come up with, rather than 0, they come up with 10. And then you can also further enhance that. They also grab the concepts more. You have their participation rather than being it being a passive method of learning.
It's a nice concept, but what is your experience? Are you already practicing it?
Sir, we are trying to implement it in our curriculum. We have just conducted, so that was just over 120 days. But then if it is successful, like gradually, maybe we will introduce it. We'll start introducing.
I think it's a good idea. It will
Yes, sir.
definitely benefit the students.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
So what I think that in the beginning, the teacher should teach for 10 to 15 minutes the basic outline. You are saying glaucoma, definition, and the basic outline. Then it should be open for discussion. So one-way teaching is not efficient nowadays.
Yeah,
Because,
definitely.
So discussion and whatever queries are there, so solving
Yes, sir.
the queries is very important. So this is a very nice.
Yes, sir.
and the interaction is there, and that is very good.
Very good effort, but don't you think that it would have been much beneficial if you could have started in PG classes, because they know each and everything almost, and they are quite mature.
Sir, actually
Go
in
for this kind of
postgraduate
teaching.
classes, it's like it becomes like a one-to-one discussion anyways. Even if in the classes that you take, it's already like the ratio is always like 1:2 or 1:3. There would be just like we have got only one postgraduate seat now, and we are 3 faculties. So like it's a one-to-one discussion. But for the undergraduates, it's like a class of 100, and the teacher is 1. So the ratio is like we need something from them also.
So, but you must be having large number of undergraduates, maybe 100, maybe 150.
Yes,
so
sir.
how can you do in such a large number? You need more teachers. 150 students are sitting in a class,
and you are thinking of flipped class room
Sir,
study.
as per our curriculum, like the teachers, like one teacher is only given one class, like that is how the course has been divided. So, like you share the material beforehand, like they also get some time. So they get time to interact with you. You first introduce the topic, they get time to interact with you. Rather than just coming and sharing your PPT, you can have some like discussions. The discussions then become more focused rather than just giving them a didactic lecture.
That means not
was the-
necessarily each and every student is supposed to participate just to.
So they
You know.
they are actually divided into groups. They can have
Yes,
group
that is what I am
discussions.
asking.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do we have Dr. Parishmita Barua? No? Then the next is Dr. Anjali Singh.
So we can just ask who.
Sabha Banu? No? Mudra Anand Puranik? Any speaker present here? What's your name? Pratibha Bera, yeah. Yes. All chairpersons are there. No speaker and no
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Pratibha Bera, Assistant Professor, MKCG Medical College, Berhampur. I will be presenting on topic study on observation of visual outcomes of clear lens extraction with posterior chamber intraocular lens implantation in high myopia patients in tertiary care center of Southern Odisha. What is high myopia? High myopia is when the spherical equivalent exceeds -6 diopter or the axial length is longer than 26 mm. This is the trend showing increase in incidence of high myopia from 2016 to 2050 given by Holden et al. Correction of a high degree of refractive error is debatable, with several modalities available on correcting high myopia are LASIK, SMILE, laser subepithelial keratomiliosis, phakic iris claw lens, photorefractive keratectomy, implantable contact lens, and clear lens extraction. Keratorefractive surgeries for high myopia correction are associated with complications such as halo, glare, loss of contrast sensitivity due to induced higher order aberrations. These higher order aberrations are due to the excessive flattening of the cornea. With technological advancements and improved outcomes after cataract surgery, the removal of clear lens in a high myopia patient has been considered a refractive modality. Vincenz Fukala being the pioneer of systematic extraction of crystalline lens in young patients with high myopia. The aim of the study is to find out the visual outcome after clear lens extraction in PCIOL implantation, and objective is to compare the preoperative and the postoperative visual outcome. It is a prospective observational study conducted over a period of 1 year and 9 months over 50 patients. High refractive error of myopia more than 8 diopter, and the patients who cannot afford refractive surgery and unfit for the keratorefractive surgeries are included in the study, whereas the retinal disease that are potentially vision impairing and age below 12 years, previous ocular surgery or laser treatment were excluded from this study. Detailed history was taken and preoperative evaluation was done. These are the color fundus photographs showing the chorioretinal atrophy, and the B-scan photo showing the posterior staphyloma in high myopia patients. And this is a case of retinal detachment. General examination, systemic examination, routine blood examination were done. Informed consent were taken, and detailed study was done, and it was entered on microscope Excel spreadsheet. This is a surgical procedure. Peribulbar block was given, and all the surgeries were performed by a single surgeon under local anesthesia. External scleral incision and sclerocorneal tunnel was done. Side port entry done, and anterior capsulotomy was done. Hydrodissection, nucleus delivery, and aspiration of cortex was done. The posterior capsular polishing was done to prevent the posterior capsular opacification. AC chamber was filled with viscoelastic and PCIOL was implanted. The government supply PCIOL was used in all the cases, and the AC was formed and the wound was closed. The intraoperative difficulties and complications was noted. These are the instruments used. Coming to the post-operative care and follow-up, topical steroids and antibiotic eye drops were administered, and the patient was examined on the first post-operative day, after 1 week, after 2 weeks, after 3 months, and 6 months post-operatively. Additional follow-up visits were scheduled if required, and at every visit, uncorrected visual acuity, best corrected visual acuity, and slit line examination was performed. Coming to the results, 64% of the patients were males, and majority age group belonged to 20 to 30 years, and most of them belonged to the urban area, and family history was present in 58% of the cases, and those who spend more on near work have increased incidence of high myopia. This is on the basis of preoperative visual acuity and axial length, and dioptry power and IL power which was given. Coming to the intraoperative complication, 50% have uneventful, and rest are 40% bleeding, and 3.3% were of iridodialysis, and 6.67 have PCR with VL. Coming to the post-operative complications, cortical remnant was seen in 30% cases, 6.67% have hypema, 6.67% have post-operative anti-uveitis, 10% have secondary glaucoma, and uneventful in 46.67%. This is basing on the visual outcome. Majority have a good visual outcome, 6/18 to 6/36. This is basing on age and axial length. In our study, majority of them have preoperative visual acuity of less than 6/60, and post-operative cases has best corrected of visual acuity 6/18 to 6/36. A high range of refractive error correction and presence of retinal degeneration contributed to decreased best corrected visual acuity in our study. The main concern of performing clear lens extraction in young myopic eyes is retinal detachment with risk of significant visual loss. Careful preoperative examination of the peripheral retina and regular follow-up for the development of retinal lesions prevent RD after clear lens extraction. Coming to conclusion, young high myopes who were unfit for laser refractive surgery and people who cannot afford the cost of keratorefractive surgeries but desire a spectacle-free vision are candidates for clear lens extraction. It presents less of a financial load and less likelihood for the need of the secondary intervention in the future. And clear lens extraction is more viable solution in developing countries with limited financial resources, since it has good outcomes with acceptable predictability and improvement in best corrected visual acuity. Thank you.
Excellent. Do you say that there favor fair outcome and to a poor outcome? These are the patients which have the BCVA less, or BCVA is 6/6, but after surgery it is like a poor outcome?
No, sir. BCVA was less. Those who are having pre-operative best corrected visual acuity less, they are having post-operative also BCVA less.
Then how it is a poor outcome? If the patient is having BCVA of 6/12,
Yes,
you,
sir.
after refractive lens exchange you provide 6/12. Then that is a
So,
good-
no, refractive lens exchange means, yes, sir, this is a procedure which gives good outcome. But those patients who cannot afford for the refractive surgeries and who belong to the poor local
Definitely.
socioeconomic status, it is helpful.
No. What he means by saying that is,
Yes, sir.
suppose BCVA was 6/6 or 6/9,
Yes, sir.
and then after surgery he gets 6/12.
Yes,
Then
sir.
you can say that the outcome is poor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And otherwise, if BCVA was already 6/12 and you are giving 6/12
It's
vision,
an excellent
then,
outcome.
then
Okay,
excellent
okay,
outcome.
sir. Yes, sir.
And what are the other things, complications which you usually come across, encounter very commonly?
Sir, in case of the high myopia, it's not, means maximum, those who are having posterior staphyloma, they have decreased vision. But in case of the intraoperative cases, mostly 50% have uneventful surgery, but mostly bleeding, and in 3.3% cases we have iridodialysis and
Do you advise them for
PCR.
any change in the lifestyle or working?
Yes,
or
sir.
something like
We have told them to decrease the near work, or if they are doing near work for more hours, then 20/20 rule should be applied to. That's we have counseled them.
And it is not for poor also. It is now a very popular practice and rich people above 40 years.
Yes, sir. Yes,
You
sir.
can put it off,
Yes,
right
sir. Yes,
focals,
sir.
and
Yes, sir.
you cannot do LASIK in those cases. They want freedom from
Yes,
glasses.
sir. Yes, sir.
They don't want to wait till the cataract came.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
it's a
Ah,
very
those
common
who are
practice these
yes,
days.
sir. Yes, sir.
Even if the patient is having 6-9 vision, the patient
Hmm.
is very much concerned.
Yes, sir.
Basically, it is a refractive surgery,
Yes, sir.
you know. But what are the challenges in biometry, and what
Sir-
kind of formula you use in high myopes? If I
Yes.
say more than 8 diopter, which
Yes, sir.
formula will you use, and what are the challenges in biometry?
Sir, we are using SRK2 here. Sir-
SRK2.
Yes, sir.
Any other formula?
Sir, actually, Holaday or Hoffer Q, those used to be used. But IOL Master is also there. But in case of higher myopia, it is difficult for us to focus. So after focusing also, if they have posterior staphyloma or something, so they are not so much cooperative. Mainly young age patients are coming.
So do you undercorrect, overcorrect, or give the same power which is coming in biometry sheet?
Sir, we are actually overcorrecting.
Huh?
Overcorrecting, sir.
How much?
Sir,
In a posterior staphyloma?
sir, 1 to 2 diopter overcorrection we have given.
2 diopter overcorrection.
Sir?
1 to 2 diopter.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what are the challenges during surgery in high myopes? This is large eyeball.
Yes, sir.
What are the challenges when you are doing phacoemulsification? What are the problems one surgeon faces in
Sir.
capsular axis and whatever it is? You know that there is a high elastic recoil in young patients.
Yes,
Collapse of the
Collapse of,
you
yes,
know,
sir, yes, sir.
See, you have to be very careful while doing capsular axis and doing phacoemulsification, because sometimes suddenly it might collapse and your phaco tip may hit posterior capsule.
Yes, sir.
So you said that in cases of high myopia there are risk of retinal detachment more than a phakic case.
Yes, sir.
If you do make him pseudophakic,
Yes.
chances of detachment
It's
increases.
less, yes, sir.
So what is the mechanism of this? Why it is more in pseudophakics?
Sir, because, sir, it is more in high myopia cases.
The high myopia cases,
Yes, sir.
operated and unoperated.
Yes, sir.
Operated case, you said that risk of detachment is more than the unoperated case.
Sir, no,
You don't have any idea. It is because vitreous volume increases.
yes, sir.
Vitreous pull over the retinal or lattice is more.
Okay, sir.
And you have to have whole life follow-up. Because myopia is a progressive disease. It is
Yes,
not that today you have operated a 20-year boy and you will ask him, okay, go, everything is final. Every year you should advise him, you should go for checkup to a retinal
Yes.
surgeon.
Yes, sir.
Because degenerative changes are progressive. He can have detachment in later life also.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, it's a new good thing. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Just one thing I want to add,
Yes, sir.
that you have to inform the patient in the consent properly.
Yes, sir.
These are the conditions which you can face.
Yes, sir.
Because after 4 to 5 years down the line, when there will be RD,
Yes,
you will
sir.
say कि भाई हमें तो पता ही नहीं था कैसा हो सकता
Hi, yes, sir.
है.
We have
that,
operated.
that is one of the most thing.
Suppose your power is coming your sheet is -1
Yes, sir.
targeted. And
Yes, sir.
And you also want to have -1 myopic. You want to make patient myopic by 1 diopter.
Yes.
Would you put a lens or not? Plano lens, would you put a zero power lens or not?
Sir, yes, sir. We have to put.
Why will you put?
Sir.
Again for the same reason.
Yes, sir.
Movement of the vitreous will be restricted to some extent.
Yes, sir.
That's a
Very
there is a barrier.
Yes, sir.
Aphakia and pseudophakia, this is the only difference in myopia.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Anyone else who has a presentation is here? Good name?
Doctor? Yeah, Sababanu, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My topic for today's presentation are comparative study of subtenous versus peribulbar anesthesia in a high-volume cataract surgery setup. My objectives are to compare safety of subtenance and peribulbar anesthesia by evaluating the type and rate of complication observed, and to evaluate the time required to achieve optimal kinesia with each anesthesia technique, and assess the comfort level of surgeon during surgeries with each anesthesia method based on the quality of local anesthesia provided. Now, subtenance and peribulbar anesthesia are two commonly used regional anesthesia techniques for cataract surgery. Both methods aim to provide sufficient analgesia, echinacea, and stable intraocular pressure to facilitate safe and effective surgery. Subtenance anesthesia involves the use of blunt cannula, while peribulbar anesthesia uses a sharp needle, each posing unique risks and benefits. Minimizing complications such as chemosis, hemorrhage, and rare events like globe perforation is essential for patient safety. And this study compares subtenance and peribulbar anesthesia to identify which technique offers better safety, faster onset of echinacea, and improved surgeon comfort level in a high-volume cataract surgery setup. Now, the material and methods. Place of study is patients undergoing cataract surgery at the Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, Sitapur Eye Hospital, Uttar Pradesh. Study period is September to October 2024, and study design. This is cross-sectional prospective observational study involving 108 patients divided equally into two groups, each group receiving subtenance and peribulbar anesthesia. In examination, mainly we monitor the complication such as chemosis, conjunctival hemorrhage, globe perforation during and post anesthesia, and assessment of echinacea and time taken to achieve it since first injection regarding surgeon's comfort on 3-point scale, and tracking additional anesthesia requirement if any needed. All patients were screened and enrolled based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Informed consent was obtained and detailed pre-operative assessment were performed. In pre-operative evaluation, medical history, we were considered following headings: medical history, visual acuity, anterior segment evaluation, intraocular pressure, and the posterior segment evaluation. And anesthesia assessment, we will see basically the complications such as chemosis, hemorrhage, and globe perforation were tracked, and the time to achieve optimal echinacea was recorded with additional injection noted if necessary. And surgeon comfort scored on 3-point scale. One is not comfortable, second is moderately comfortable, and third one is excellent, excellent comfort level. And mainly we how to proceed the patient. Mainly, first we have to screen the patient and enroll them. Then informed consent should be taken and history collection should be proper. And pre-operative evaluation should be done under the following headings such as visual acuity by Snellen's chart, anterior segment evaluation by slit lamp examination, IOP measurement should be tonometry or rebound tonometry. Posterior segment evaluation by ophthalmoscopy, and the anesthesia administration. We will see here we have to compare the subtenance and peribulbar effect. So 3 ml we have to give the subtenance and 5 ml in the peribulbar. Next we have to monitor the complication in terms of chemosis, hemorrhage, and globe perforation. Lastly, we have to assess the echinacea, record the time to achieve optimal echinacea, and re-administer anesthesia if needed. Lastly, we will see the surgeon comfort assessment. One is not comfortable, second is moderately comfortable, and third one is excellent comfortable. Lastly, we have to consider the stats analysis. Inclusion criteria, mainly we are considering here age group 50 to 80 years of age, and pre-operative workups should be completed and eligible for the cataract surgery. The type of cataract, we only include the simple cataract here. We all excluded all the complicated cases from this study. And anesthesia suitability, patient fit for either subtenance or peribulbar anesthesia, and surgical setting schedule for high volume cataract surgery setup. Informed consent should be taken. And exclusion criteria, complicated cataracts should be excluded, as I already said. Other ocular conditions such as patients with glaucoma or corneal pathology or retinal diseases should be excluded. Previous eye surgery, patient with prior intraocular or corneal surgery should be excluded from this study. Systemic conditions, patient excluded with uncontrolled diabetes or hypertension affecting surgery's outcome. Anesthesia contraindication, if any contraindication is present, we should not consider the patient in this study. Not compliance patient, we already excluded from this study. So result, we will see, we have already categorized patient in the 4 age group criteria. First one is 50 to 60 years, second one is 61 to 65, third one 66 to 67, and the fourth one 71 to 80 years. And accordingly, we categorize your patient, how many patients receive peribulbar and how many receive subtenance anesthesia. For example, 17 patients receive Okay, sir. 17 patients receive peribulbar anesthesia in the particular age group of 50 to 60 years of age, and 10 patients receive subtenous anesthesia in between 50 to 60 year of age group. And 17 patients in peribulbar anesthesia receive peribulbar anesthesia in between 61 to 65 age group, and 20 patients receive subtenous anesthesia. 50 patients receive 15 receive peribulbar in age group of 66 to 70 years, and 12 receive subtenons in between 66 to 70 years of age group, and 5 in peribulbar in between 71 to 18 a year of age group, and 12 in the subtenons. So the demographic data shows, as I already discussed in the tabular form. This is descriptive stats analysis of my study. Akinesia grading is 5.19 in peribulbar mean with plus minus 2.42 standard deviation. In subtenons, this is 4.86 with plus minus 2.92 standard deviation. Time of akinesia in peribulbar is 118.90 with plus minus standard deviation 15.10. And in subtenons 115.69 plus minus 12.63. Chemosis noted in peribulbar 46 out of the 54 patient, and 40 out of 54 patient in subtenons. Analgesic during block 17 patient noted no pain, 37 patient with mild pain, and 36 patient in subtenons with no pain, and 18 with mild pain. Analgesia during surgery 5 in peribulbar with mild pain, and 49 in peribulbar with no pain. In subtenons, 5 with analgesia during surgery noted with pain, and 49 with no pain. Analgesia after 1 hour, 49 in the peribulbar group with no pain, and 5 with the pain. 46 in subtenons analgesia after 1 hour noted pain, and 8 don't feel pain. This is the data showing already in the tabular form. And comparison of chemosis presence, scatter plot showing the peribulbar group greater variability in the time to achieve akinesia, and slight upward trend in the regression line, suggesting an increase in onset time for the patients. In subtenons group, more consistent onset time with less variability, stable akinesia onset across patients. Key insight, subtenous anesthesia shows more predictable and consistent result compared to peribulbar anesthesia, and peribulbar anesthesia has more variability and requires closer management to achieve consistency. Stats test result is T-stats is 1.75 and p-value 0.042. That is significant because this is less than 0.05. My discussion is variability in akinesia onset. Subtenous anesthesia showed more consistent and predictable onset of akinesia compared to peribulbar anesthesia with the flatter regression line. And in peribulbar akinesia exhibited greater variability in onset time, suggesting a need for more precise management. In stat significance, the difference in mean time to achieve akinesia between the two techniques was statistically significant because p-value is 0.0042. And in subtenous anesthesia demonstrated a significantly faster onset, highlighting its efficacy in high volume cataract surgery setup. Analgesia pattern subtenous anesthesia provided more stable intraoperative analgesia with fewer reports of pain during the surgery, and in peribulbar anesthesia exhibited greater variability in pain management with some patients experiencing pain during surgery. Complication rate subtenous anesthesia had a higher incidence of chemosis compared to peribulbar. This finding highlight the trade-off between faster onset and lower complication rate. Faster onset in subtenous and lower complication rate noted in peribulbar. So clinical implications is subtenous anesthesia may be preferred in high volume cataract surgery setting due to its fast.
Please conclude. Yes. Please conclude.
Okay, sir. Due to its faster and more consistent outcome, and peribulbar anesthesia remain a viable option, but may require closer monitoring for intraoperative pain management. Study strength. This study offers a comprehensive comparison of two anesthesia techniques in high volume cataract surgery setup, helping guide anesthesia choice based on the surgical and patient's need. My recommendation is to further research with a larger sample size and longer follow-ups is recommended to validate these findings. And review of literature studies comparing phacoemulsification as ICS shows that both techniques causes change in central corneal thickness and endothelial cell count. Deepthi et al. Found that while both subtenous and peribulbar anesthesia provided a comparable pain control during surgery, subtenous anesthesia resulted in significantly less
So
pain.
I think you conclude because You are, you know, you are supposed to speak for 5 minutes. Time was allotted.
Time is 5 minutes beforehand.
And
We got instructions.
you have already. Yes, last slide.
So these are my references, sir.
No,
Sir,
when
the
you are
last conclusion
when
is.
you are preparing your presentation, you stick to timing also. You just see that you are.
Yes, sir.
It's,
On your laptop,
you already spoke for 12 minutes.
don't put stopwatch
Yes, sir.
when you.
But because we have got less number of speakers, so we allowed you to speak. Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, you are not.
Anyway, you please conclude.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
No, please complete.
You complete. You.
Conclusion you can have.
Sir,
What is
my
your
last.
recommendation and what you feel?
So my last
Experience.
conclusion is subtenance is better than peribulbar anesthesia because the faster onset of action in subtenance than the peribulbar anesthesia. Because we are we are mainly seeing the conducted this study in the high volume surgery cataract surgery setup. So basically we used subtenance anesthesia
This is your routine practice at in your
yes, sir.
institution?
in my institution.
Subtenance.
Yes, sir.
How much time does it take if you compare it with the peribulbar?
Sir, in around 35 patients, it takes around 2.14 seconds or 2.30 seconds. But in peribulbar anesthesia, it takes around 3 minutes or 4 minutes around.
For procedure, how much time you take?
Sorry, sir.
For putting cannula, how much time do you take?
For putting cannula,
Injecting time.
injecting time, sir, subtenance, in subtenance, this is less than the peribulbar.
You are using only lower fornix or both fornix?
Sir, lower fornix. Yes.
You told that there will be echinacea. How this lower fornix anesthesia will cause echinacea in subarachnoid and subarachnoid? It is not going to reach there.
Yes.
This will be too late. Number one. Number two, it would have been much better. This is a very good technique. It would have been much better if you have showed. It is a purely clinical thing. You know, it is not a such a theoretical thing. You would have given at least 30 seconds video. 30 seconds video on how to do it.
Those who are not doing it, they will have some carry home message. In this theoretical discussion, they won't be able to, it will not be disseminated to other colleagues, those who are not using it. You should have shown at least the technique, how do you do it,
Yes, sir.
isn't it?
Yes.
It would have been much better. Okay.
How much dose you use?
Sir, 3 ml in subtenance and 5 ml in peribulbar.
Number
3
two,
ml.
you should have given indications, proper indications. As in squint surgery, it is not advisable.
Yes,
In
sir.
orbital surgery, it is not advisable, right?
Yes.
You should have proper indications.
You
Like
exclude,
pterygium, you can use it.
you
Cataract,
exclude
you can use
glaucoma
it.
patients.
Yes.
In glaucoma
In
patients,
glaucoma
it is
patient, you can't use it because you are using the upper fornix.
Yes, sir.
in glaucoma patient, it is better than peribulbar, not?
In
You
glaucoma.
exclude,
Yes, sir, I excluded.
sir, in glaucoma patient, I think it is better than peribulbar.
It should reach to the upper fornix.
That is a different thing. But otherwise, in glaucoma patient, they exclude from this study. In glaucoma, peribulbar block is more dangerous than.
This is peribulbar. If you give it, is not very dangerous because direction of the hill is away from the bone.
Yeah.
It is striking to the clear wall and upper wall, upper orbit. If you are giving on the both sides. So glaucoma it is better, definitely. Glaucoma you have chance. In high myopia it is in high myopia, especially when you have a parametrist glaucoma, this is the ideal technique for high myopia. In high myopia you can have low puncture.
Also, when you're converting from phaco, so it's more comfortable to do a subtenance.
Yeah. That's why I told her that you should have at least show
थोड़ा videos रहने से it would be
technique
more
attractive बन जाता है बेटा आपका presentation attractive
Your topic is very nice, but you should have changed.
in 5 minutes you can't convey all these things, all discussions, all references.
Yes,
You
sir.
can give the names of the references, not whole story.
Your technique is good. Basically, uses
good
of this from topical. If you are doing a topical phaco, and suddenly patient is not cooperating, then it is a very good technique.
During
Very
surgery
good
you can give
technique.
it.
When you want to convert.
During surgery
yes.
you can give it.
That is a very good technique.
You should have given some practical tips.
Some
what,
practical tips,
yeah.
so that
Okay.
those who are listening to it, they can learn something from your, and you next time when you go for this kind of paper presentation,
Come
stick
with a
your
video.
time and you should practice 3-4 times.
Yes, sir.
You must
Time
do
वाला
rehearsal.
ही अपने
Rehearsal करके तब
ठीक है
आना
ना?
चाहिए. Okay.
They will cut marks because यहाँ तो लोग नहीं हैं, ज़्यादा लोग will allow you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Any other speaker? Yeah. Okay.
She will be presenting on headache in children as a common disability in ophthalmology.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Zeba Khan. I am second year PGT from Silchar Medical College and Hospital. So, my topic I am going to present is headache in children as common disability in ophthalmology (OPD). So, headache is a leading yet under-recognized cause of disability worldwide, disturbing the education and social life of children. Children with headache have a poor health quality of life, with a significant impact on their education with poor educational performance. Headache attributed to refractive error has become particularly relevant given the ubiquity of electronic devices and the associated rise in eye strain. Ophthalmologists see children with complaints of headache on regular basis. So, the aim of our study is to describe the characteristic of headache in children and its association with refractive error presenting to outpatient department in our center. So, it is a descriptive questionnaire-based cross-sectional study. Study duration was 1 year, done in between January 2023 to January 2024. We included 200 children with age group 6 to 18 years old. We included all children with informed consent from guardian, and assent from children are included. And we included all the verbal children. We excluded children with prior head trauma, children diagnosed with psychiatric illness, congenital diseases, epilepsy, and severe ill patients, and also non-verbal children. So we included 200 children from 6 to 18 years old presenting with headache to our ophthalmology department. We provided all of them a headache-related questionnaire. Also, we have done a detailed ophthalmologic evaluation including visual acuity, BCVA, ocular alignment, slit lamp examination, and fundus examination for all the patients. So our questionnaire consists of 22 questions with yes or no response, written both in English and local understandable language. So our questionnaire, we included like the time of onset of headache, its association with any other symptoms like nausea, vomiting, when it increases, and if the patient is having any other medical illness, if any of the family members have the similar episodes. So in the result we have seen there, out of 200 children or male, we have 60% of male and 40% of female. And maximum patients were belong to 10 to 18 years old, and consisting 69% of the population, and 31% belong to 6 to 9 years old. So our result based on the history and the questionnaire and the symptoms they have, according to their symptoms, we had divided them in refractive error. We have seen patients with refractive error in 130 patients, and migraine with 40, and patients with tension headache, there were 13 patients, and with others like sinusitis and adolescence-related headache was 17. So we have seen that out of 130 patients who had refractive error, maximum patients were male, that is 80% of the patients, and other patients had migraine and tension headaches, and others like sinusitis and headache associated with adolescence. In headache due to refractive errors, maximum patients, that is 71% of the populations were myopic, and 13% were astigmatism, and 16% with hypermetropia. And among them, patients with myopia, they basically presented with frontal headache, and patients with hypermetropia and astigmatism, they had holocranial headache. And with myopia, patients gave family history, 10 patients gave family history of headache, and All these patients had screen time more than 2 hours per day. So in the discussions, we have seen that in our study, we have seen almost 2/3 of children presenting to our OPD had headache-associated refractive error. In our study sample, vast majority were adolescent. More than 2/3 of children with headache-associated refractive error were found to be myopia. We found that children with headache-associated refractive error were more likely to have frontal headache compared to children with headache due to other causes and for longer duration. It is more than 1 month. Family history did not have any significant association in our study. Headache-associated with refractive error demonstrated a statistically significant association with the presence of myopia, the most frequent refractive error rather than hypermetropia or astigmatism in our study. Prolonged screen time has been demonstrated to be a risk factor for headache-associated refractive error. So our recommendation is each children with headache should receive a full ophthalmologic evaluation, consumption of healthy diet, limitation of screen time. Parents must encourage children for participation in outdoor activities than indoor activities, maintaining 20-20-20 rule and using of lubricating eye drop. So these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jiva. How many patients in your OPD, pediatric age group, has had the presenting complaints?
Total 200 patients were there, but we have excluded the patients with other symptoms like migraine, tension headache, so sinusitis. On the basis of the questionnaire we have asked, and also the symptoms they had associated with the headache.
So all headaches are related to refractive error?
No, sir. 1/3 of patients among 200 had refractive error.
And others?
Others, we had migraine, 26%.
Do you think too much digital use, mobile and dryness is also?
Yes, sir. All the patients had screen time more than 2 hours, according to the questionnaire.
Migraine was diagnosed elsewhere by his physician? Or
We have, no, sir.
No?
Actually, according with the symptoms we have asked like if they had no refractive error. We have ruled out. We have done the VCB and everything. The patients actually had migraine-associated symptoms. They had vomiting. They had nausea, vomiting, and patients they had irritation to sound, light. So all the symptoms, according to the symptoms and according with the visual acuity and all, we have separated them.
did you find some correlation between timing of headache?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
For timing means, sir, patients with migraine, they had headache when exposure to bright light, so that is excluded. But with refractive error, there is no timing. They had most of the patients, while they complain the complaint was while it was diagnosed from the school teachers, they said they cannot view the distance thing, and the parents.
Usually most of the time we find that the patients complain of headache towards the end of the day, or especially after coming back from school.
Yes, sir.
That is very important, because
Jiva, you have missed out a very important, since headache, migraine and tension headache, physicians also treat.
Yes,
right?
sir.
You should have stick to purely. I think you can include them, but you have missed out a very two important things. Number one, you did not mention orthoptic checkup. Asthenopia, convergence deficiency, exophoria, esophoria, vertical squint. If somebody is having inferior oblique overaction or superior oblique overaction, he will have headache. Number two is the dry eye syndrome these days. Those who are having more
Yes,
screen time, especially those who are working on systems, IT people, they have headache because of the dry eye. They don't understand what is going to happen. Irritation, headache, watering. That's a very important
Yes,
point.
sir. Yes, sir.
You should have focused more on ophthalmic causes rather than the migraine and tension headache. They physicians also treat them. Sometimes you have to refer it to neurologist.
Yes.
When it is not controlled by ophthalmologist, migraine, you should refer it to neurophysician. But refractive error, asthenomia, you don't refer to anyone. This is your domain.
Yes.
Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I would take a moment to confirm if there are any other speakers for the comprehensive ophthalmology session.
any other speaker left? One?
No, she's here.
Who is the speaker? Anjali Singh. Where is she?
Okay.
She should have been here only. The session was from 8:30, so she should have been here. Very poor attendance. Out of 11, only four speakers.
This is a midterm
Out of-
conference,
yes.
not the
This-
state conference.
This shows the commitment of the candidate. Yes. You are Dr. Anjali. So the session
Why you are
was
so
from
late?
8:30.
Session is starting at 8:30.
All the speakers, please stay on till the end of the session because we'll have a group photograph also.
Good morning, everyone. Correlation of serum vitamin D levels with tear film parameters in dry eye disease. Dry eye syndrome is a multifactorial condition and that results in symptoms of discomfort, visual disturbance and tear film instability. Recent studies have shown that dry eye is an
Anjali,
inflammatory
you first
disease.
introduce yourself. Where are you from and what are you doing right now?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Anjali Singh. I'm from SSMC College, Rewa, and I'm vitamin D deficiency that is related to various other medical diseases may also cause dry eye, as studies have reported dry eye syndrome to be a localized autoimmune disease. My aims and objectives is to study the correlation between serum vitamin D level and tear film parameters for stability and secretion. My study center was my college. Duration of study was between March 23 to February 24. It is a case control study and the sample size is 40 cases and 40 controls. Inclusion criteria for my cases were all patients with dry eye syndrome, and exclusion criteria for my cases were regular contact lens users with history of smoking, current or recent drug use affecting the lacrimal function, active ocular infection, scarring or previous eye surgery, and the inclusion criteria for controls were healthy individuals with no evidence of dry eye. The comprehensive ophthalmic examination included visual acuity, AS examination, IOP measurement and fundus. Dry eye assessment included OSDI, Schirmer test and TFBUT. Serum vitamin D levels were estimated for dry eye patients as well as controls using immunoassay method. Correlation of mean serum vitamin D levels with mean values of tear film parameters were analyzed. The results showed the mean age of case group being around 52.32 years and mean age of control group were around 51 years for the cases. The male to female ratio in the case group were 1:1.46 and for control group were 1:1.32. The results for mean OSDI score for cases were around 40, for Schirmer test was around 9.82 and TFBUT was around 6.38. The most of the cases were fell under the category of vitamin D deficiency, that is 67.5%, and the results were found to be significantly lower among cases vitamin D deficiency. This is the correlation graph between the OSDI score, Schirmer test and the TFBUT, in which the OSDI score showed negative correlation and Schirmer test and TFBUT showed positive correlation. Discussing the study on comparing the mean levels of serum vitamin D between cases and controls, we found that DAS patient had a significantly lower vitamin D level compared to the healthy control group, and stratifying the dry eye patients according to their vitamin D level, we found that most of them were vitamin D deficiency. Almost all studies comparing serum vitamin D levels between dry eye patients with healthy controls found a statistically significant lower vitamin D level in dry eye, And studies that evaluated serum vitamin D level in dry eye patients only also reported DS patients to be having mean vitamin D levels in either the deficient grade or insufficient grade. We found a significant negative correlation between OSDI score and serum vitamin D level of patients, and this is in accordance with the studies by Meng F.Y. et al. And Shah P. et al. However, Lee J.H. et al. And Jin K.W. et al. found no correlation between OSDI and serum vitamin D level. Analyzing the correlation between serum vitamin D and Shermer test value as well as TFBUT, we found a significant correlation which was positive, and similar observations were made by Jin K.W. Shah P. et al. Also found a positive correlation with Shermer value, but unlike our study, they did not find any correlation with TFBUT. So, concluding the study, it confirms that serum vitamin D levels are deficient in patients of dry eye, and furthermore, a significant association exists between serum vitamin D levels and various parameters of dry eye like OSDI, Shermer, and TFBUT. So the take-home message is all patients of dry eye disease should undergo at least a serum vitamin D level assessment, and vitamin D supplementation can be given as a potential therapeutic strategy for refractory patients. References, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali. Vitamin D supplementation, you give how many doses in which form?
Actually, sir, in my study, we did not give any therapeutic vitamin D. We just studied the serum vitamin D level.
How does the vitamin D deficiency affects dry eye, and which layer is affected? Aqueous layer, mucin layer, or lipid layer? Which layer is mostly affected by the deficiency of vitamin D?
Sir, we just tested the dry eye
As
parameters.
you told that TFBUT and the Shermer are directly related to the vitamin D deficiency, which layer is importantly involved in vitamin D deficiency?
Mostly, sir, in our study, we didn't actually categorize between the aqueous or mucin layer.
No, but with the references you must have read that vitamin D, what is the mechanism? How does it cause dry eye?
Vitamin D actually.
Where is the defect? Which layer?
It's in the mucin layer.
It is the aqueous layer.
Aqueous layer.
Right? Then suppose we correct the vitamin D deficiency, is it going to affect the dry eye or going to improve the dry eye?
So the studies have not confirmed that vitamin D is actually related, because in many studies they have said that vitamin D is not vitamin D supplementation is not improving.
It's not definitive treatment, it's an arbitrary treatment, because you have categorically said in all cases of dry eye, suppose there is a disease of Meibomian gland. Is it going to help in Meibomian gland deficiency, dysfunction diseases?
Sir,
Definitely not.
Yes, sir.
It is one of the factors. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other speaker?
May I have the keynote speaker? The speaker for keynote address, Mr. Vipul Rana.
Is he around, Dr. Vipin Rana? Because we will be delaying other session, no?
I think the keynote address speaker is not present.
Okay.
So we can
When we
just wrap
conclude
up
it, yes.
the session. Thank you all the speakers. It was
Anybody, any question from the audience? Just a general question regarding these topics.
Sir, I have a question. Vitamin D deficiency, it's prevalent. Like when we go for vitamin D deficiency, most of us are vitamin D deficient. So yes, exactly.
Which
So
layer and which specific test you perform, or all the deficiencies, treating the deficiency is going to help in dry eye or not? It is definitely not. There is a multifaceted disease. It is not a single, if there is deficiency of aqueous layer, there is deficiency of lipid layer as well.
thank you, sir.
In fact, everybody going for vitamin D estimation
Everybody is
will
deficient because they
deficient.
have nobody sitting in sunlight.
Yes.
She's a really,
So I think we'll conclude this session, and I request all the speakers to come forward and have a for the group photograph.